The wagon had been sitting in the same spot for 3 days. Elias Drummond noticed it first on Monday morning, when the sun barely cleared the ridge and the valley still held its breath in silver mist. The wagon sat crooked near the creek bed, one wheel sunk deep in mud, canvas cover torn and flapping in the wind like a wounded bird trying to fly. He'd meant to ride down and check it. Meant to, but the fence line needed mending, and the cattle had broken through again near the eastern pasture, and by the time he remembered, the light was gone and supper was cold on the table. Tuesday, the wagon was still there. Wednesday morning, his daughter Cora stood at the window, her small hand pressed against the glass, breath fogging the pain. "Papa," she said quietly, "something's wrong with that wagon." Elias didn't look up from his coffee. "Probably just abandoned. Happens all the time. Folks get tired, leave things behind. It wasn't there last week." "No, it wasn't." She turned to face him, her dark eyes too old for 7 years. "You should go look." "I will." "When?" He set the cup down harder than he meant to. "When I get to it, Cora." She didn't flinch. She'd learned not to. Instead, she turned back to the window, and Elias felt the familiar weight settle on his chest, the weight of all the things he meant to do, meant to say, meant to fix. His wife had been gone 2 years. His brother, longer. By mid-morning, he'd saddled the roan mare and started down the slope toward the creek. The air was cool, sharp with the smell of sage and stone. The valley stretched wide and empty, the kind of emptiness that made a man feel both free and utterly alone. The wagon looked worse up close. Canvas shredded, supplies scattered, flour sacks split open, clothes trampled into the mud, a child's doll lying face down in the dirt. No horses, no people, just the wind moving through the wreckage like something searching for a voice. Elias dismounted slowly, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. The mare snorted, ears flicking forward, then back. "Easy," he murmured. He circled the wagon once, boots squelching in the soft earth. Whoever had been here left in a hurry, or didn't leave at all. There were tracks, but the rain 2 nights ago had blurred them into shapeless divots. He crouched near the front wheel, studying the mud, and that's when he heard it. A breath, low, ragged, coming from underneath the wagon. Elias froze. The mare took a step back, ears pinned flat. Another breath, slow, deliberate, like something trying not to be heard. His pulse kicked hard against his ribs. He straightened slowly, hand closing around the pistol grip, and took a step toward the wagon's shadow. The space beneath was dark, cluttered with broken crates and tangled harness leather. "I know you're under there," Elias said, his voice steady. "Come out slow, and we won't have a problem." Silence. Then movement. A shift in the shadows. Something dragging across the ground. Elias drew the pistol, cocking the hammer with a soft click that echoed louder than it should have. "I said come out." The breathing stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but the wind and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Elias's finger tightened on the trigger, every muscle coiled, ready. Then a hand appeared, pale, filthy, reaching out from the darkness like a man clawing his way out of a grave. Elias didn't move. The hand gripped the edge of a crate, trembling, and then a face followed, gaunt, covered in dried blood, eyes half closed and glazed with fever. The man dragged himself forward an inch, then stopped, breath hitching in his chest like a saw cutting through bone, and Elias's heart stopped. Because he knew that face. He knew the line of the jaw, the shape of the nose, the scar above the left eyebrow from a fall off a barn roof 20 years ago. He knew it the way a man knows his own reflection. "Jesus Christ," Elias whispered, the pistol dropping to his side. The man's lips moved, but no sound came out. His eyes flickered, unfocused, desperate, and then he collapsed forward into the mud, still half trapped beneath the wagon. Elias stumbled forward, dropping to his knees beside him. His hands shook as he gripped the man's shoulder, turning him just enough to see his face fully in the light. It was impossible. It couldn't be, but it was. "Thomas?" Elias's voice cracked. "Tommy?" His brother's eyes rolled back, and his body went limp. Elias looked down at the man in the mud, at the brother he'd buried 5 years ago in a grave outside Abilene, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't know what to do. Behind him, the wind picked up, and the torn canvas snapped like a gunshot. The mare bolted, and Elias was alone with a ghost. He got Thomas onto the horse, barely. It took 20 minutes of dragging, lifting, and half carrying his brother's limp body across the mud. Thomas didn't wake, didn't speak, just hung there like a sack of grain, breath shallow and rattling in his chest. Elias didn't let himself think. Thinking would make it impossible. So he moved one step, then another, until Thomas was slumped over the saddle and Elias was leading the mare back up the slope toward the ranch. By the time they reached the house, Cora was standing on the porch. She didn't say anything, just watched as Elias half-dragged Thomas inside and laid him on the floor near the stove. The man's head lolled to the side, eyes still closed, skin pale as ash. Cora stepped closer, tilting her head. "Who is he?" Elias didn't answer. He was already moving, stripping off Thomas's filthy shirt, checking for wounds. There were plenty. A deep gash along his ribs, poorly bandaged and infected, bruises across his chest and back, cuts on his hands. His feet were wrapped in rags, bloodied and torn. "Papa," Cora said again, quieter. "Who is he?" Elias sat back on his heels, staring at the unconscious man on his floor. "Your uncle." Cora's eyes widened. "Uncle Tommy?" "Yeah, but—" She stopped, confusion creasing her small face. "You said he died." "I thought he did. How can someone die and then not be dead?" Elias looked at her, then back at Thomas. "I don't know, sweetheart." She crouched beside him, her hand hovering just above Thomas's shoulder, like she was afraid to touch him. "Is he gonna die now?" "Not if I can help it." They worked through the afternoon. Elias cleaned the wounds as best he could, stitched the gash with thread from his wife's old sewing kit, wrapped his ribs in clean cloth. Cora fetched water, held bandages, stayed silent. Thomas didn't wake. By evening, Elias had moved him to the bed in the back room, the room that used to be his wife's sewing room, then a storage room, now just a place for ghosts. He sat in a chair by the bed, watching Thomas's chest rise and fall, and tried to make sense of it. 5 years ago, Thomas had left for Kansas with a cattle drive. 3 months later, a man rode into town with news. Thomas Drummond was dead. Shot in a dispute over cards in Abilene. Buried in a pauper's grave. Elias had ridden out to see for himself. Found the grave. Found a marker with his brother's name carved into cheap wood. He'd stood there for an hour, said things he should have said years before, and left. That was supposed to be the end. But here Thomas was, breathing, bleeding, alive. Behind him, the door creaked open. Cora slipped inside, her nightgown dragging on the floor. "You should be asleep," Elias said. "So should you." She climbed into his lap without asking, curling against his chest like she used to when she was smaller. Elias wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on the top of her head. "Are you mad at him?" she asked. "Who?" "Uncle Tommy." Elias didn't answer right away. "I don't know. He left, didn't he? That's what Mama used to say, that he left and never came back." "Yeah. Is that why you're mad?" Elias closed his eyes. "Maybe. Are you mad at Mama for leaving too?" The question hit harder than it should have. Elias tightened his arms around her, swallowing hard. "Your Mama didn't leave, Cora. She got sick. I know. But she's still gone." He didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence, listening to the sound of Thomas's labored breathing, until Cora's head grew heavy against his chest and her breathing evened out. Elias carried her to her room, tucked her in, and stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her sleep. When he returned to Thomas's room, his brother's eyes were open. Elias stopped in the doorway. Thomas stared at the ceiling, his face expressionless, like a man waking from a dream he couldn't quite remember. "Tommy," Elias said quietly. Thomas's eyes shifted, slow and unfocused, until they found Elias's face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Thomas's lips moved, voice barely a whisper. "Eli." Elias stepped into the room, heart pounding. "What the hell happened to you?" Thomas closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. "Thought you'd never see me again. I thought you were dead." "Close enough. Who did this to you?" Thomas shook his head, wincing at the movement. "Doesn't matter. It matters to me." "No." Thomas opened his eyes again, and this time there was something sharp in them, something desperate. "You can't," he coughed, the sound wet and painful. "You can't let them know I'm here." Elias's blood went cold. "Who?" "Anyone." Thomas's hand shot out, gripping Elias's wrist with surprising strength. "Promise me, Eli. No one can know." "Tommy, promise." Elias stared at his brother, at the fear in his eyes, the desperation, and slowly nodded. "Okay, I promise." Thomas released him, his hand falling back to the bed like a weight. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." Elias didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. and somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. Elias's head snapped toward the window. Thomas heard it too. His eyes went wide. "They're here," he breathed. "Who's here?" But Thomas didn't answer. He just stared at the ceiling, his face pale as death, and whispered one word: "Run." The riders came at dawn. Elias heard them before he saw them, hoofbeats like distant thunder rolling across the valley floor. He stood at the window, coffee gone cold in his hand, and watched 4 shapes materialize out of the morning mist. They moved slow, deliberate, like men who had all the time in the world. Behind him, Cora stirred at the table, spoon clinking against her bowl. "Papa?" "Stay inside," Elias said quietly. "Who are they?" "I don't know." But that was a lie. He knew exactly who they were, or at least what they were. The kind of men who didn't knock, the kind who rode hard, carried iron, and left nothing behind but questions and graves. He set the coffee down and crossed to the gun cabinet, pulling out his rifle. His hands were steady, but his heart was hammering against his ribs. In the back room, Thomas stirred. "Eli," he called, voice tight with panic. "Are they here?" Elias didn't answer. He checked the rifle's load, then moved to the door, cracking it open just enough to see. The riders had stopped at the fence line. 3 men and a woman, all dressed in dark coats and wide-brimmed hats. The woman sat at the front, straight-backed and still, her face shadowed. The men flanked her, hands resting on their thighs close to their guns. The woman tilted her head, studying the house. Then she dismounted with practiced ease, handing her reins to the man on her left. She walked forward alone, boots crunching on the gravel drive. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle held low but ready. The woman stopped 10 feet away. Up close, she was younger than he'd thought, maybe 30, with sharp features and eyes the color of slate. She didn't smile. "Morning," she said, her voice smooth and cold as riverstone. Elias nodded. "Morning. Nice place you got here." "It serves." She glanced at the barn, the corral, the fields beyond. Quiet, peaceful, the kind of place a man might want to disappear to. Elias's grip tightened on the rifle. "Can I help you with something?" The woman's gaze slid back to him, slow and assessing. "Maybe. We're looking for someone. A man. He's hurt, might have come through here in the last few days. Haven't seen anyone." "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." She studied him for a long moment, then smiled, thin and humorless. "You know, Mr. Drummond, lying's a sin." Elias's blood went cold. "How do you know my name?" "I know a lot of things." She took a step closer, hands clasped loosely in front of her. "I know you've got a daughter. I know you've been alone out here since your wife passed. I know you're the kind of man who keeps to himself, minds his own business." She paused. "I also know your brother's in that house." Elias's jaw tightened. "My brother's dead." "Is he?" The silence stretched between them like a blade. Behind the woman, the 3 men shifted in their saddles. One of them, a tall, lanky man with a scar running down his cheek, rested his hand on his pistol. The woman noticed. "Easy, Cole," she said without looking back. Then to Elias, "I'm not here to cause trouble, Mr. Drummond. I just want what's mine." "I don't know what you're talking about. Thomas took something from me. Something valuable. I want it back. Like I said, he's alive, Mr. Drummond." Her voice sharpened. "I saw the wagon. I saw the tracks. I know he's here." Elias raised the rifle, leveling it at her chest. "Get off my land." The woman didn't move, didn't blink. She just looked at him with those cold grey eyes and said, "You really want to do this? I want you to leave. And if I don't, then we'll have a problem." She smiled again, wider this time, like she'd just won something. "You know what I think, Mr. Drummond? I think you're a good man. A decent man. The kind who helps people, even when he shouldn't." She tilted her head. "But good men die just as easy as bad ones." Elias's finger hovered over the trigger. "Last chance." The woman held his gaze for another long moment, then stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "All right, we'll go, for now." She turned and walked back to her horse, swinging into the saddle with easy grace. "But I'll be back, Mr. Drummond, and when I do I won't ask so nicely." She pulled the reins, and the 4 riders turned as one, moving back down the drive toward the valley. Elias didn't lower the rifle until they disappeared over the ridge. His hands were shaking. Behind him, the door creaked open. Thomas leaned against the frame, his face pale and slick with sweat. One hand pressed against his ribs. "You shouldn't have lied for me," he said quietly. Elias turned, anger flooding through him like a dam breaking. "What the hell did you do, Tommy?" Thomas looked away. "I made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "The kind that gets people killed." Elias stared at his brother, at the guilt and fear etched into every line of his face, and felt something twist in his chest. "Who is she?" "Her name's Evangeline Cross. She runs a syndicate out of Dodge City. Gambling, smuggling, worse things." Thomas's voice was barely a whisper. "I worked for her, for a while. Then I tried to leave. And she didn't let you." "No." Thomas met his eyes. "She doesn't let anyone leave." Elias's jaw tightened. "What did you take from her?" Thomas hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He held it out, and Elias took it, pulling the drawstring open. Inside were diamonds, dozens of them, glittering and cold in the morning light. "Jesus, Tommy." "I know. You stole from her." "I was trying to buy my freedom." Thomas's voice cracked. "I thought if I had enough money, I could disappear, start over somewhere. Somewhere she'd never find me." Elias stared at the diamonds, then at his brother. "She's going to come back." "I know. And when she does, she's going to kill both of us." Thomas's shoulders sagged. "I know." Inside the house, Cora appeared in the doorway, her small face pale. "Papa, what's happening?" Elias closed his fist around the pouch, the edges of the diamonds biting into his palm. "Nothing, sweetheart," he said quietly. "Go back inside." But they both knew he was lying. They spent the day preparing. Elias sent Cora to the root cellar with instructions to stay there no matter what she heard. She argued, of course she did, but one look at his face silenced her. She descended the narrow stairs with her doll clutched to her chest, and Elias locked the door behind her. Then he and Thomas got to work. Thomas could barely stand, but he insisted on helping. Together, they barricaded the windows, stacked crates near the doors, loaded every gun in the house. Elias moved with grim efficiency, while Thomas worked in silence, his face drawn and grey. By mid-afternoon, the house looked like a fortress, and felt like a tomb. Elias stood at the window, watching the valley. The sun was sinking low, painting the hills in shades of gold and amber. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that made a man forget how cruel the world could be. Behind him, Thomas lowered himself into a chair, wincing. "You could still run," he said quietly. Elias didn't turn. "Where?" "Anywhere. Take Cora and go. I'll stay here. Maybe she'll be satisfied with just me." "She won't." "You don't know that." "I do." Elias finally turned, meeting his brother's eyes. "Men like her don't forgive. They don't forget. If I run, she'll hunt us down. If I stay, at least I can fight." Thomas looked down at his hands. "I never meant for this to happen, Eli. I never meant to bring this to your door." "I know. Then why are you helping me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible. Elias crossed the room and sat down across from his brother. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, and a hawk cried somewhere in the distance. Finally, Elias said, "You remember when we were kids, when Pa used to take us hunting up in the high country?" Thomas nodded slowly. "You remember that time you fell through the ice on Miller's Creek?" A faint smile touched Thomas's lips. "Yeah, I remember. You were under for maybe 10 seconds. Felt like 10 hours. I jumped in after you without thinking. Pa had to pull us both out." Elias leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "He beat the hell out of me for that. Said I could have drowned. Said I should have gone for help instead. You saved my life." "Yeah." Elias looked at him. "And you know what I told Pa? I told him I didn't think. I just did it. Because you were my brother. And that's what brothers do." Thomas's eyes glistened. "Eli, I don't care what you did, Tommy. I don't care what mistakes you made or who's coming for you. You're my brother, and I'm not going to let you die." Thomas looked away, his jaw working. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not. But you've got it anyway." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of all the years between them, the anger, the distance, the things left unsaid, slowly settling into something softer. Finally, Thomas said, "Tell me about Cora." Elias smiled, the first real smile in days. "She's stubborn, too smart for her own good, looks just like her mother. Does she know about me?" "A little. Your sister-in-law used to tell her stories, made you sound like some kind of outlaw hero." Elias shook his head. "I never corrected her." "Why not?" "Because kids need heroes, even if they're made up." Thomas laughed a quiet, broken sound. "I'm no hero, Eli." "No, But you're here, and that's something. The light in the room was fading now, shadows creeping across the floor. Elias stood and lit a lantern, the warm glow pushing back the darkness. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas said. "Yeah. When you thought I was dead, did you miss me?" Elias stopped, his hand still on the lantern. The question was simple. The answer wasn't. "Every day," he said quietly. Thomas's shoulders shook, and he pressed his hands to his face, breath hitching. Elias crossed the room and put a hand on his brother's shoulder, squeezing once. "It's all right," Elias murmured. "We're all right." Thomas shook his head. "No, we're not. After tonight, we'll figure it out." "How?" Elias didn't have an answer, so he just stood there, his hand on his brother's shoulder, and let the silence speak for both of them. Outside, the sun slipped below the horizon, and the valley went dark. And in the darkness, something moved. Elias saw at first a flicker of shadow near the tree line, then another, and another. "They're here," he said quietly. Thomas looked up, his face pale. "How many?" Elias moved to the window, peering out into the gloom. He counted 5 shapes moving through the grass, low and silent as wolves. "Too many." Thomas pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. "Give me a gun. Tommy, give me a gun." "Eli." Elias hesitated, then handed him a revolver. Thomas checked the cylinder, then nodded. "Whatever happens, thank you." Elias met his eyes. "Don't thank me yet." A voice called out from the darkness, clear and cold. "Mr. Drummond, let's talk." It was Evangeline Cross. Elias gripped his rifle and stepped toward the door. Thomas caught his arm. "Don't go out there." "I have to. She'll kill you." "Maybe." Elias pulled free. "But she won't get past me to you." He opened the door and stepped into the night. The night was cold and still. Elias stood on the porch, rifle in hand, and watched Evangeline Cross step into the circle of lantern light. Behind her, her men fanned out dark shapes with rifles trained on the house. She stopped at the bottom of the steps, hands empty and open. "I'll make this simple, Mr. Drummond. Give me Thomas and the diamonds, and I'll leave. You and your daughter can go back to your quiet life. No one else has to die tonight." Elias didn't move. "And if I say no?" She smiled, cold and sharp. "Then I'll burn this place to the ground. With all of you inside. You think I'm afraid of you? I think you're smart enough to be." Elias raised the rifle, aiming it at her chest. "Get off my land." Evangeline's smile faded. "Last chance, Mr. Drummond. Same to you." For a moment, the world held its breath. Then everything happened at once. Evangeline dove to the side as Elias fired, the bullet kicking up dirt where she'd stood a heartbeat before. Her men opened fire, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like lightning. Elias threw himself back through the door as bullets chewed through the wood, splinters exploding into the air. Inside, Thomas was already moving. He fired through the window, the revolver booming in the enclosed space. Outside, one of the men screamed and went down. "Fall back!" Elias shouted, grabbing Thomas and pulling him toward the back of the house. "Get to the cellar." They stumbled through the narrow hallway as bullets tore through the walls, punching holes that let in slivers of moonlight. Behind them, the front door exploded inward, and boots pounded across the floor. Elias shoved Thomas toward the cellar door. "Get Cora and go out the back tunnel. It leads to the barn. What about you? I'll buy you time. Go." Thomas hesitated, then nodded. He yanked open the cellar door and disappeared down the stairs. Elias slammed it shut behind him and shoved a heavy trunk across it. Then he turned to face the shadows pouring into his home. 2 men came first, young, wild-eyed, guns raised. Elias fired twice, and they dropped like puppets with cut strings. He ejected the spent shells and loaded 2 more, moving on instinct. A 3rd man appeared in the doorway. Elias fired, but the hammer clicked on an empty chamber. The man smiled and raised his pistol. Then the wall beside him exploded. The man staggered, blood blossoming across his chest, and collapsed. Behind him, Thomas stood at the top of the cellar stairs, revolver smoking. "Thought I told you to run," Elias said. Never was good at following orders. They moved together, back to back, as more men poured into the house. The air filled with smoke and noise, the sharp crack of gunfire mixing with shouted orders and screams. Elias lost track of how many there were. He just kept firing, reloading, firing again, until his hands were black with powder, and his ears rang with a high, constant whine. Then silence. He stood in the wreckage of his home, breathing hard, and realized there were no more shadows, no more footsteps, just the crackle of flames. The house was burning. "Tommy!" Elias shouted. "Here." Thomas appeared through the smoke. Cora clutched in his arms. Her face was buried in his shoulder, her small body shaking. "Out!" Elias pointed toward the back door. "Now!" They ran. The heat was unbearable, the smoke choking. Elias kicked open the back door and they stumbled into the cool night air, gasping and coughing. Behind them, the house groaned, a low, mournful sound, and the roof collapsed inward, sending a column of sparks spiraling into the sky. Elias fell to his knees, watching everything he'd built turn to ash. Cora pulled free from Thomas and ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. "Papa!" He held her tight, pressing his face into her hair. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay. Where's Uncle Tommy?" Elias looked up. Thomas stood a few feet away, swaying slightly, his hand pressed to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Tommy, I'm all right," Thomas said, but his voice was weak. "Just need a minute." Elias moved to him, pulling his hand away to see the wound. "It was bad. Too bad. We need to get you to a doctor." "No time for that." Thomas sank to the ground, his back against a fence post. "She's still out there." As if summoned by his words, a figure emerged from the shadows. Evangeline Cross. Her coat was torn, her face smudged with soot, but her eyes were as cold and sharp as ever. She held a pistol in each hand. "Impressive, Mr. Drummond," she said, "but it ends here." Elias stepped in front of Cora and Thomas, his rifle raised. "You're outnumbered. So are you. Maybe. But I've got more to lose." They stared at each other across the burning wreckage, two people who'd already lost too much. Then Evangeline lowered her guns. "Keep the diamonds," she said quietly. Elias blinked. "What?" "I said keep them. Consider it payment for the entertainment." She holstered the pistols, then turned to look at Thomas. "But if I ever see you again, Thomas Drummond, I'll kill you myself. Understand?" Thomas nodded weakly. "Understood." Evangeline looked back at Elias. "You're a fool, Mr. Drummond, but you're a loyal fool. I respect that." She tipped her hat. "Good luck." Then she walked away, disappearing into the darkness like she'd never been there at all. Elias stood frozen, unable to believe what had just happened. Behind him, Thomas laughed a wet, painful sound. "Guess she has a heart after all, or she's just tired of losing men." Elias knelt beside him. "Come on, let's get you patched up." They made it to the barn, where Elias cleaned and stitched Thomas's wound by lantern light, while Cora kept watch. By dawn, Thomas was stable, weak, but alive. The house was gone, the cattle scattered, everything Elias had built reduced to ashes. But his brother was alive, and his daughter was safe. That was enough. 3 months later, Elias stood in the frame of a new house, hammer in hand, watching Cora chase chickens across the yard. Beside him, Thomas measured a board, his movements still careful, still slow. "You don't have to stay, you know," Elias said. Thomas looked at him. "I know." "Then why are you?" Thomas smiled, a real smile, the kind Elias hadn't seen in years. "Because you're my brother, and that's what brothers do." Elias nodded, something warm settling in his chest. Together, they lifted the board into place, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, high and clear and free.